Mr. Rainwater.
Hey there, Jow.
Are you guilty of judging a book by its cover?
Yeah, of course. I don't know how many. I don't know how many like sci-fi books or albums, especially albums. I'll pick based on the cover. Like
Sometimes, absolutely. I mean, when I used to go back in high school, I was a lonely fellow, much like I am now, and I would go to Best Buy on every single Tuesday,
yeah,
and I would blindly buy Blu-rays and DVDs. I think it was just DVDs back then. Based on the cover, I would go to the new movie section, check out a couple of things. And, oh, that looks good. That looks good. That looks good. Nothing I'd ever heard of. Like the internet was not nearly as prevalent. Facebook was barely a thing. I don't know. In high school, Facebook wasn't a thing. Wow, Jesus Christ, I'm old.
Right.
So I would go to Best Buy and I would pick out a movie or DVD or whatever, based solely on the cover, 100%. And I think it's actually pretty telling that they have to tell you in the phrase that everyone says, right? That they always reiterate, which is don't judge a book by its cover. They have to tell you that because everybody does.
Well, and I'm like blanking really honestly, because I feel like I've had times where I ended up watching something, even though watching a movie or reading a book, even though the cover was really bad. But hell, if I can remember right now, I can definitely think of a lot of books though, a lot of comic books where like, I mean, as a kid, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I read a bunch of Sonic the Hedgehog comics, and they Archie Comics did this thing. It's not just Archie Comics, it's comics in general, but Archie Comics was particularly bad about it, where the covers, they got a really amazing artist to do all the covers for those books, and then the interiors were dog shit. Just the worst possible art.
That is a thing that I have noticed is very commonplace in the comic book industry, is the cover art never matches the art on the inside. And is that specifically done as a marketing technique, or is it more of like a production end type thing?
It's gotten better. I've noticed that it's gotten better over the ages. And something that they're trying to do more now is to have the cover artist be also the interior artist. That doesn't always happen. I think part of the reason that doesn't always happen is because quite often the interior artist is so bogged down,
busy
with like they just can't get to doing the cover, because the cover usually takes, I mean, if you're doing it right, it probably takes 3 to 4 days to do it, and you get paid 3 to 4 days work on doing a cover too. Like cover artists make really good money in comics industry, but you have to be a very good artist to do it. Like I know you get Jim Lee or Todd McFarlane to do a cover for something, they're getting paid a very, very decent amount to do that cover, because they know that that artist is going to draw a lot of attention to that book quite often.
Isn't that kind of false advertising though? Because I've fallen prey to that before, where I'm like, oh, this is a Jim Lee comic, and it's not a Jim Lee comic, it's a Jim Lee cover. And
I think Jim Lee right now is still like, he works as an editor. I want to say he works as editor for DC, or is it Malibu? I can't quite remember. He works as an. He
wasn't always just a cover guy. He was an actual.
Yeah, he did interiors for a while.
Yeah,
and everybody loved him on his interiors. He, being a smart business person, figured out over time, I'm going to make more money and not
work nearly as hard. Sure.
Not burn myself out doing interiors, so I'll just do covers. And then over time, he's doing editorial work for comics, which I don't know entirely the reason behind that. I'm sure he makes great money, I'm sure he's doing fine, but he still likes to do covers because he still likes to draw. Like, I don't know if he's still doing it, but recently I had seen him do a Twitch stream, like a Twitch channel, of when he was like working on Batman covers or just illustrations and stuff like that. Because one of his main reasons for doing it is because he still wanted to actually be engaged in drawing. Because when you're drawing that much, I have a pretty good idea of how much Jim Lee was drawing at the beginning,
Yeah.
right? It's that kind of habit that you don't want to step away from. So a cover artist is kind of one of those positions that you earn after
Okay.
having been through the fire, and your chops are that good. So every once in a while you get a book where the cover artist and the interior artist are the same person, and that's always like some of the best books. Frank Quitely is an artist who tends to do both the covers and interiors for his books. I
Mm.
think I don't know this for certain, but I suspect it's because he would not have it any other way.
That's fair. And I was actually going to ask you that if there was any that were like, no, 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 that's mine too.
Yeah,
And I respect and applaud those people. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not downplaying the people who do let someone else do the cover, or they might not
yeah.
even have that option. Because at some point you have to draw a line and be like, hey, I got to spend time with my kids before they grow up. Or
Right, and what you're saying is true. Like oftentimes they don't have the option, and so going back to Sonic the Hedgehog, another artist that I can think about who did both the cover and the interiors for at least for a little bit was Ben Bates, who was working on the Sonic the Hedgehog comics for a while. And that to me, as somebody who grew up on those comics and seeing that, I was like, oh, cool. Because like I knew him personally when I was in my internship. He was doing that stuff where he was working on interiors and covers at the same time, and then complaining about how the pay was dog shit, because it was. Because Archie Comics did not pay their artists well at all.
mm,
And he moved on to doing storyboarding, which is fairly lucrative as far as like arts go.
oh,
But
don't tell me that. As somebody who wants to develop a cartoon slash when I do the storyboards for Haunted, I'll be doing them with stick figures. Like
yeah,
a total cost saving technique to begin with, let alone the fact that it might be more than I would have expected it
I
to have
mean,
been.
really, honestly, all you need are shapes anyway. You just need circles for heads,
Yeah.
stick figures,
Smiley face, frowny
yeah.
face. Everybody gets the gist. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, this guy's wearing purple. It's important. Give me the purple marker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Nope. Exactly. But it's interesting the whole idea that covers for comic books, because that's a different realm where when you have like a movie, like we were talking about before with like movies, the same artist 99 times out of or I should say 9,000 times out of 10,000 times.
Yeah.
The person doing the poster work is not the director or film. I don't want to say that's never happened, but in mainstream, I should say, like indie shit, like for Haunted, I'm the guy mocking up those photos or the poster and this and that. But
Sure.
the covers are never almost done by an actual director or filmmaker. When it comes to bands, I don't know how many of them actually. I know they probably have an idea of what they want. I know they probably have final say about what it looks like, but I don't think they're the ones doing the art for the covers of their albums most of the time.
Yeah, frequently that isn't the case. I can think of some instances where they seek out specific artists that they want to work with.
Sure.
Roxy Music is an interesting band because they had pretty much through all their albums, they had a consistent design philosophy. So I think they worked with the same photographer for each and every one of them. And they all go through this every album cover has this sort of mythic supermodel photography that goes on. It's very difficult to describe, but it kind of looks like almost an advertisement for perfume or something, but it's more. I love it. Like I really love their design philosophy for their album covers, and I love the fact that it's going to be a Roxy Music album because you see that particular style of album cover. So there's going to be some beautiful woman on the front of the album, and maybe doing some kind of weird, almost Renaissance painting sort of look. And then, other bands, they try and do a bunch of different things, right? They get experimental. They're trying to get, attention. I mean, one of the more infamous examples was the White Album by the Beatles. It was just like literally, the album was just white, that was it.
Yeah.
And because it had never been done before, people, as soon as people saw it, they knew what it was because that was the gimmick, right? You only get away with that once.
Yep. Jay-Z did the same thing. I think he did the Black Album at one point, but I think I can probably count on two hands how many artists have done quote unquote the Black Album. I'm pretty sure AC/DC did one, maybe Metallica. Like, you know what I mean? Like it set a standard, but it's interesting to me that comics is the only one where you could have someone who does the cover and the interior.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's almost a very unique thing that I would think they would want that to take advantage of that.
The only time they don't want that is when they know that the interior artist sucks. So,
but why hire them then? Money, I guess, is because it's just cheaper to.
Yeah, that frequently. So, this is something. This is a particular aspect of print comics in general.
Okay.
Maybe comics in general that I get really annoyed with, which is that editors will hire people, I think, more so on their ability to visually tell a story rather than whether or not as an artist they're super competent.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, granted, like, I understand that if you can visually tell a story, that's the most important part.
Sure.
For sure. But it's different. I don't know. It's different when you're a big name company, if you're Marvel or DC, and you hire somebody who's not really super competent, not great at perspective or not great at anatomy or whatever, or their style just doesn't match what the artist you're going to use for the cover. That's the biggest...
that's a very jarring thing I've had happen to me before. I was like, this does not look at all like what I was sold on.
Yeah, so like going back to Sonic the Hedgehog, they were frequently... I keep going to that example because that was honestly the only comic I read when I was a kid. So I learned a lot more as I got older about how that stuff works and found out how much it resonated to the rest of the industry. But anyway... there was a particular artist by the name of Patrick Spaziante who did most of the covers for Sonic the Hedgehog between like issues issues 25 to 65, 70, maybe even up to 100, somewhere around there. And he was like their guy to go to sell their comics because he was a really good artist. But for a long time, the interior artist was commonly this guy by the name of Ken Penders, who sucked. He was not good at drawing Sonic the Hedgehog, and some of his storytelling choices were fraught at best. And so frequently...
Oh, I'm looking at pictures now.
Yeah. Ken Penders is infamous. In the Sonic the Hedgehog community because
that looks worse than the first iteration of the Sonic CGI for the movie.
Exactly. It's even more awkward and more haunting in how horrible it looks.
Yeah.
So as a kid, I kept feeling like I was getting the runaround because I would see these awesome covers and immediately want to buy the comic, and I wouldn't even look at the interior until I got home, and then I would open the book. I would open the comic and be like, "Oh fuck, it's Ken Penders again." God,
gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. So it always felt like I was never really getting my money. I guess the story was always decent enough that I kept wanting to go, and it felt like a reward when better interior artists got in, and better interior artists did come around, but it took a while. It took a long time.
That was my favorite thing about Goosebumps books. It was just the pictures on the cover, and then it was the manuscript inside. Like it was just That was it. Like you didn't
Those
have to worry about getting
the
duped.
covers for those Goosebumps books are awesome too.
I just bought Tim, I think you pronounce it Tim Jacoby, I think his name is.
Okay.
There's a collection of covers from Goosebumps that he just released as a hardcover book, along with his thumbnails, alternate versions, a little bit of commentary about what he was doing. I think he did like all of the original Goosebumps books run except for like 2 or 3 covers tops.
Okay.
And it was early on, they were kind of experimenting with who else they wanted to do or whatever. And he ended up being the guy that they wanted like all the time. But those covers, man, they set the mood, they set the tone, like everything was, it was that horror that was still kind of safe for kids, but it wasn't so bubble wrapped the way horror is for kids these days. You know what I mean? Like now they just turn it into some goofy, kind of campy like type thing where it's, and don't get me wrong, Goosebumps has that. It's not without that, but it was still dark.
The covers maintain a level of creepiness too, though.
Yes, right.
And that's what's most, I think that's what, when you go to read the book, that's what
it stays.
You in,
yep.
You know?
And that's the beautiful thing about a cover is it sets it's the opening. It's the you know how they tell you, well, I don't know if they tell you, but when they tell screenwriters, they're like, your first 10 pages, you got to hit, because that's the first, that's the only thing people are going to read. And after the first 10 minutes, if they're hooked, they'll keep reading. If they're not hooked, it's going in the trash can, and that's it. That's basically what covers are for everything else. Like you look at a cover and you go, oh, not only does the art have to be engaging and good, but it has to sell you on what is actually going to be in the book. What's the story about? What's the atmosphere? When is it set? Who is this for? You know what I mean? Like my wife has all those trashy romance novels upstairs about vampires and werewolves and all that shit. And it's, you know, very romanticized imagery where it's just like a half naked guy and a girl in kind of like a flowy dress, and the clarity, it's a little on the soft focus side with a nice, you know, soft light on it, and there's a moon in the background and very, you know, soothing colors. It's basically porn, but but it says exactly, like you look at that book and you're like, all right, I'm not interested in that. And you know, you look at like a Goosebumps cover and you're like, that's what I'm in the mood for. Or Animorphs, like you look at an Animorphs cover and you're like, oh okay, I get it.
I gotta say, the Animorphs books managed to survive despite how janky their covers are, but
yeah, because they're gimmicky.
I will say that those. So I mean, there's no tricks in the covers, right? You know what every Animorphs book cover is going to look like. Yeah. You do get an idea of what the characters look like, though, which I think is pretty crucial, and that's particular to the mentality of doing covers for children's fiction and young adult. There is more of a focus on setting in a more specific way what the characters look like, what the world looks like. The Harry Potter books are an excellent example. You immediately have an image of what Harry Potter looks like in your head because of they're explicit, right? As to like what it looks like on the cover. It's interesting because when you get into more you know, like Tom Clancy novels or quote unquote airport novels or fiction that is literary, quote unquote, you get very abstract with the covers.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. I think part of that is because the idea is you want to give the reader more of an option to determine what those characters look like in their mind.
That's interesting. I never thought about that, but you're absolutely right.
And I think it's also a way to make, in a way, it makes the characters more relatable for the reader, because the reader's putting more work into realizing what that world looks like for them.
Yeah.
Putting more work into how they involve themselves in the prose, basically.
And then you have weird things like movies. Like, so for me, a movie poster is going to be what sells me on it. And thankfully, I don't think Drew Struzan ever did a poster for a bad movie. But if he did, I probably have watched it. But now, like nowadays, I don't know how it is in the comics, because to be honest with you, I haven't walked down an aisle for a comic book in, years, maybe even more, like longer than a decade. But for movie posters now, I know exactly what it is. It's the mountain of heads syndrome. And
Yeah.
that was I don't want to say created by Drew Struzan. It kind of was. It was the style that he set, and then everybody was like, "Oh, we can just do that with Photoshop. Take a couple pictures of the actors, to slap a filter on it, and make their heads into." I mean, if you look at the fucking the poster for Dune, it's literally a mountain of heads. And
it's an incredibly boring poster, and I mean, like you're saying, it hasn't. It doesn't seem like any of that's really changed much since, I don't know, when did that probably start? I mean, you could trace those far back as like 2013, or it's been a while that's been the trend.
yeah, I want to say since probably the re-release of the Star Wars films, because that's when Struzan did the posters for them. He didn't do the original posters.
Yeah.
A lot of people get confused about that, but he did like Back to the Future. That's not a mountain of heads. It's Marty McFly leaning out of the DeLorean.
Yeah.
And, like
No,
that
it's
kind of
very
stuff was
active.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you get an idea that like there's going to be a lot going on in this movie. No, I think another thing that I'm thinking about is there was a trend in movie posters. I think this is around The Dark Knight, where it's just like silhouette of the main character facing away, right? Because they did this for the second Star Trek movie, and they did that for a bunch of movies. And I think it's a trend thing, right? It's the same thing as like we had. I don't know how. It felt like a decade that we had the Inception horn be crucial to trailers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we finally got out of that, where we're now in this period where, okay, the new trend is we're going to play like some old boomer song, but like change the tempo or have a cover of it or whatever.
Yep. And that's Jordan Peele's fault.
Oh, really? I didn't even, I hadn't put together an origin for it yet.
If you go back to the trailer for his second film, Us.
Okay.
God, what was the name of the song? Because I was just banging it the other day, actually. It was like 3 weeks ago. I had that particular remix on loop. Damn, I can't remember what it was, but I Got Five on it. It was a song from the 90s. I got five on it. And like they drop out the hip hop track underneath it, and they just add in this very like dramatic horror violin. Dun-dun-dun. Like that, you know what I mean? And it worked because that particular culture that he was going after for his market, they listened to that kind of music. That was his age. That was an oldie. That was the thing. But then he kind of put his own kind of spin on it where it's, and remix in hip hop culture is like,
oh yeah,
there's no issues with that whatsoever.
Yeah, no, it's crucial. It's crucial to the culture because that's really like
how
the
it
ground
started,
from which it grew, basically.
Taking samples and remixing. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, he had the way to do that. But then that trailer, when that trailer originally dropped, more people were talking about the trailer song than they were the trailer.
Oh, no.
And that was, that's probably why it was, the same thing. Same thing with Inception. Everybody was talking about Inception, yeah. But when the trailer for it dropped, because you got to remember, no one knew what the fucking movie was about before they sat down to see it. It was just like, oh, it's a heist movie in your brain.
Yeah.
What? Like nobody understood what that meant. Nobody understood what they were getting out to see. But that trailer, when that came, everybody because it happens multiple times in the trailer.
Well, and it was original at the time too.
Oh yeah.
That's the thing. The reason why it worked so well and everybody mimicked it is because how effective it was, because it was something completely out of left field,
right,
as far as like how trailers had been done since. And it stuck with everybody. And I mean, I'm sure it had a huge impact on how well that movie did in the box office.
Sure. Absolutely.
Because it's like, how can you forget about that, seeing that movie, because everybody's like, oh, that fucking trailer,
And even the poster for that movie was subject to the what you said. It has Leonardo DiCaprio facing away from the people looking at the poster, staring into the city as it like, I think it was like flooding with water or the city's upside down or whatever, but it's Leo's facing away from the poster. So even that was still violating it. But there was, but it's interesting how like a poster is a cover for a movie essentially. They
Yeah.
used to sell movies off of the poster. Like Canon Films, every time they made a movie that was like financed by international things, they would have a rough concept about what the gimmick was or the angle or of what the plot was, like what's the hook for the story.
Yeah.
They would make a poster and that's what they would show to investors, and investors would invest based off the poster. Didn't have a script, didn't have a director, didn't have a cast. They would just mock up a poster, show the investors, oh, that looks like it'll be a good movie. Okay, here's our money. And that's how Canon made movies for the longest amount of time. And I'm pretty sure Roger Corman did the exact same thing. But
Oh yeah. Hell yeah.
it's one of those things where it's really interesting where you have one, it really is true what they say, you have one opportunity to sell your audience, and it's usually in one image. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to me that they still do the mountain of heads on posters, because okay, we got Morgan Freeman, we got Michael Caine, we got Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, you're really just, you could just put their names. You don't have to show the face, even though people are more likely to look at a face and recognize it than they are to read. But you could have them doing something. You
Yeah,
know what I
well,
mean? Like,
I'm looking at these Canon movie posters, and they are in themselves works of art.
sure.
I mean, there's so much work that's gone into older movie posters that I miss, and I feel is missing in the art of selling things in general. So much in the last decade or more has gotten really minimalistic. So like
Mm,
you were asking about, I think you were kind of asking about in regards to the comics, the major trend has been a more and more minimalized,
mm.
like I trying to find some minimalist iconic imagery to sell a book with. And it's always like you always get only like one character. You don't get like a whole cast of characters, or very rarely do you.
Yeah.
I will say somebody who is butting against that trend is Sean Gordon Murphy, because all of his, not all of his, but a lot of his covers for his Batman books, I think, do proper justice to like being a comic book cover. Because comic book covers, same ways as movie posters and all that, you really want to give something that looks spectacular, so that you're not just turned off by the book.
Yep.
I think that's why I haven't been reading that many comic books lately, is because a lot of the covers just don't evoke anything for me. They don't grab
Yeah.
my interest at all.
I'm looking at his covers right now, and I absolutely see what you're talking about. Like, they are still a little bit minimalistic, but there's stuff going on. Like, I'm looking at one, I don't know if he did the Batman White Knight, and it
Yeah.
looks like Batman's gripping onto a jail cell bars.
Like you get
And
an idea of what's going to be happening in the story by looking at it, and it's not just like, oh, here's a character. This is nothing. Like I
Right.
can't do anything with that.
That's the marketing people going, no, we just need to see Batman. We don't need anything else. We're good. Just, don't overcomplicate it. And it's like, no, well, I want to see Batman, but I've seen Batman a million times. Show me Batman doing something different. Like,
Yes.
what's different about Batman this go round? Why should I spend my $3.99 to see what Batman is up to? Because otherwise, it's just par for the course.
Well, and you know what's weird about that too is, so one of the major things that a movie poster needs to sell you on is who's going to be in the movie, right? If there's a
Mhm.
big name actor,
Yep.
So I was looking at some of those Canon movie posters, and clearly, my assumption is the executive is like, okay, we just need to make sure that the audience knows Chuck Norris is going to be in this movie. I don't know what he's going to be doing, some kind of karate. I don't know.
Have him
Give him
throwing a
guns.
kick or holding the gun, one of the
Yeah.
two.
So, the poster artist just has to do a really good job of evoking Chuck Norris is going to be powerful in this movie, and that's what you need to know.
And see, I can get maybe originally that is what you want to sell, right? You want to sell Chuck Norris being a badass.
Yeah.
But after a while, isn't it more interesting if you see Chuck Norris like on the ground on the poster, a bloody mess, like completely savaged, and you know what I mean? Like whoever the co-star is or whatever like that, the heavy standing over him like with a gun pointed down at him. Like to me, it's like, oh shit, somebody beat up Chuck Norris. Like I want to see who this guy is. He's got to be bad. Like, you know what I mean? Like you have to
Yeah.
be, you have to understand that your marketing and advertising is telling a story in itself, right? Even if it's about a actor or a character or anything like that, like after a while, you can't keep telling me the same things.
Yeah.
So like the new Batman movies coming out, right? And I'm watching these trailers, and I might be the only one. Maybe it's just me because I've watched Batman Begins so many times. But I'm watching this and I'm going, that moment was in Nolan's Batman movies. That moment was in Batman and Nolan's Batman movies. That moment was in Nolan's Batman. Are they just cherry picking these moments because they're similar and they want to evoke that, oh, this is going to be more like Batman Begins and Dark Knight? Or did Matt Reeves just tell a fucking Batman story that we've seen a million times already? And I'm going to be bored to tears when I'm sitting in this theater. So, like, that's why the jury's still out for this movie on me.
I definitely get the sense looking at it that they're attempting to conjure up similar feelings to the Nolan Batman movies. Because you have Paul Dano like talking through a muffled voice, a la Bane. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have what seems like they're trying to portray it as a quote unquote more grounded, realistic Batman story.
Yeah.
I think that the Nolan movies were so successful that they don't want to stray away from that, because why
Well,
would
they
you?
did, because they did with Zack Snyder and Ben Affleck, and that didn't really work the way, you know, it has its a loyal fan base. Don't get me wrong, and they're loud. But the numbers that were behind Nolan's aren't there, and so then you notice like there's the graffiti, like the Joker thing had the "Why so serious" and all that stuff spray painted everywhere, and now you have the Riddler spray painting things everywhere, and I'm just like, he can do other things. He doesn't have to do what the Joker did. Like, we had this problem before. Jack Nicholson was a zany Joker, and then Jim Carrey decided to be a zany Riddler that was ripping off the Joker a little bit more. And it's like, you all don't have to do what worked before if you're confident in what else can work.
Yeah, it comes back to, I mean, I guess this ultimately comes back to what made the animated series so effective, was that every villain is thought out as a personality and not as an archetype. So like the Riddler as a personality in the animated series, very specific persona. He has very specific things that Batman figures out to use to his advantage against him.
Yep.
And that's what makes it so interesting, because what makes those shows so compelling is Batman actually does fucking detective work. Even though it's not necessarily always solving a crime in the sense of following a trail or something, it's defeating a villain through deduction of reasoning. In not just, I mean, it does plenty of punching and kicking, but not just punching and kicking. There are always points in those stories where his mind is the thing that he has to use to overcome the obstacle that's in his way. Hopefully this movie figures that out to some extent. Probably not. It's probably going to be an action movie. See him chase around the Penguin in in his car.
In a fucking muscle car. Yeah. It's going to be 3 hours long, though, so I really am hoping that they've figured out a way to come at it from a different angle. I'm not optimistic, but, you know, something as I've been learning more and more lately, it's better to go into movies with low expectations because they can only be above. So I want it to be good. I want it to have a good time at the movies. I want to see more if it works out. I don't have a lot of faith in Robert Pattinson as Batman. I don't have a lot of faith in the movie after watching the trailers, but
it's coming out this month, right?
The first weekend in March.
Oh, first weekend in March. Okay, well, maybe we can watch it. We'll try and watch it pretty close to each other, and we can talk about it on the show.
I have tickets for the Thursday or the Wednesday night. I think it technically opens on Friday, but they're doing pre-screenings, and I scored tickets to Wednesday night.
Nice.
I'm pretty jazzed about it, but only because I like going to the movies, and it's an event, and there'll be a nice, exciting crowd, that kind of thing. But back to covers.
Yeah.
So, for you, as an artist and also a audience member, what do you look for? Like, have you noticed any trends in covers that appeal to you, or is there anything that you like to put into your covers? And I know you don't do covers as much these days because you're doing a webtoon, but I have a Garage Raja comic book that I actually stumbled across today, and you've done comic work before. So, like, you know, is there anything that you do when you're approaching making a cover?
I mean, for a while, so with Garage Raja, when I was doing that, a lot of the covers that I did were very reminiscent of manga that I was reading at the time. And manga would do, particularly Shonen Jump manga. So Shonen Jump, sort of like the Marvel or DC of Japan. They would do this thing where the cover really had nothing at all to do with what was going on in the story. Like, at all, at all. Did not evoke any sort of idea of what any of the characters would do. Sometimes it would feature the characters just dressed in something totally different, like playing volleyball on the beach or whatever.
Hmm.
And I thought that was a really odd idea because okay, so first of all, the covers always looked good. Okay. Part one, that's important. I thought it was curious that the subject matter was always so off from the interior. And I think that the idea was to convey, I don't know what the idea was. I'm still trying to figure it out. I think that what it must have been about, so Shonen Jump, first of all, let me say this. They pull in millions of readers.
Okay.
Like, DC and Marvel cannot touch the number of readers that they pull in. Wow. And these are people who are going to come in no matter what. So I guess their attitude towards it is way more hands-off and is just like, you know what? Do whatever you want. We don't care. A lot of times the authors have full control over what's going on in their story, what's going on the cover, all that stuff. So I think when you're an author who is deliriously underslept because you work, I mean, Shonen Jump authors work ridiculous 80, 100-hour weeks. So,
been there.
Yeah. So a lot of times when they're like, I got to put a cover out, they're like, okay, fuck it. It's just going to be Luffy eating an orange. That's the cover. Because I don't have time to do anything else. Stop.
Well, you also have to factor in, and we've talked about this in the past, you only have so much creative decision-making juice in your brain per day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, if you don't have to waste time doing that, then it's better. So the idea that there's just like, this, and then do it, you know, that maybe adds to the creativity they're allowed to put into the book.
And it's a different, like I said, they're going through a different sort of strategy, right? Because with movies in the United States, or movies everywhere, so much money goes into making that movie, and a huge part of that budget goes into advertising it. They want to make sure that it hits home as hard as possible.
Yep.
Whereas with this, when you're like releasing stuff weekly, and that's the craziest part, they're releasing sometimes 20, 23 pages a week.
Is that a lot?
26 a month is standard in the United States.
Wow. Okay, wow.
So when that's the case, your attitude towards it is going to be completely different.
Sure.
And their attitude in general towards storytelling is, I think, it's different. It's different from the United States. It's a bit more, well, if it works, it works. Whatever, you know. It's something that I probably, honestly, I want to get my friend Austin on to talk about, because he's way more enveloped in manga culture than I am, and would have a better say on this and a better understanding of that workflow that they have. But anyway, all this is to say, different attitudes for designing covers, right? Different ways of thinking about it. So anyway, going to Garage Raja, I tried to do, when I was doing a cover for every chapter, I generally wanted to make them like references to albums, to like musical albums.
Okay.
It was a story about a garage band, so I would frequently try and make a lot of music and rock references and do that through the covers. But then when it was covers for the collected albums, I went for something that was more evocative of what was going on in the story within the book. Because in my mind, I wanted to get across the idea of like, okay, here's what's going on in the story. So like the cover for the Garage Raja book that you have, it evokes some idea of like there's caves, there's characters. I mean, that's about it. There's music, and that's because that was all I could figure out how to get across. And to me, it's very evocative of being early work because I wasn't really sure what I was doing. And mostly what I was also doing is copying like Mike Mignola.
Okay.
Because, and Mike Mignola has more of a. So for all of his Hellboy covers, they're all these very iconic triangle compositions. Hellboy's usually standing at the top, and then below him are all the other subject matter that takes place in the book. And on one level, it's kind of lazy because you can't really pick one book from another based on the cover. At the same time, Mike Mignola is he's such a compelling artist that I like to look at them anyway. He has a very deep understanding of using contrast effectively, like as a graphic designer. So, like I said, a critique would be that he could do more. But when you're Mike Mignola, you can get away with murder, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there is that clout that, people do reach a certain level and then they can just do, they can do whatever the fuck they want. And it doesn't matter how bad it is. People who think it's bad will be like, oh, well, it's so-and-so. So it is good. And I'm just wrong. I won't say it out loud because I don't want to get fired or piss off this big time artist or whatever like that. But even Drew Struzan, I've seen some stuff that he's done and I've been like,
right.
Okay, well, whatever. And,
one of my favorite cover artists of all time is Frank Frazetta. And he's most iconically known as the artist for the Conan the Barbarian, like the classic Conan the Barbarian books. So he basically established the look of Conan, right? Like this big muscular barbarian with long black hair. That was entirely his decision making. And he's classically trained artist. I feel like artists like that don't really exist anymore in the same way. And my favorite thing about him, because I bought an art book and read through the whole thing, and one of the things that I thought was most fascinating was he would talk about how most of his work he did the night it was due.
Guilty.
So he would churn these things out in 8 hours, which to me is nuts. I don't even know how you do that, because this is incredibly like sophisticated artwork. But because he was such a well-trained artist, like he had figured out a way to just churn them out without
sit down, bang it out, and do it.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the gun to your head, as artists, as self-starters, as we've talked about in the past, the gun to your head is a necessary evil. And if you realize that you need it, you prepare for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if I know, like today I was possibly going to have a writer's meeting on Sunday, and then everybody bailed. But I was going to turn in an outline today for Cemetery Sweethearts. And I knew that I needed to use all my creative juices while I'm polishing Haunted. And I was like, well, that's okay. The deadline is midnight on Friday. So I can bang this out. So even though I was working on Haunted and doing stuff during the week, treadmill, cooking dinner, taking care of the kid, yada, 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 in the back of my brain, I was doing the work. I was like, okay, this is the opening sequence. This is the climax. This is probably the B story. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I had things already in my brain. I was like, okay, I'm going to list the rules first. Like, you map out a lot of things in your head way before you get to sit down to do it. So it doesn't surprise me. And then also on the other side, I'm guilty as just as anybody else of waiting until the last minute to complete a project. You were witness to that when I was exporting digits, not 7 hours before the world premiere, trying to get it to burn to a disc.
That's funny because my assumption wasn't that you were procrastinating, but that you had stuff that you just really wanted to fix, and maybe I totally misunderstood that.
No, and that's the thing, is that there was stuff that I wanted to fix.
I had assumed it was a perfectionism thing. I guess.
There absolutely was, but the problem was there were problems that I knew that were there that I could have fixed earlier, and some of which I forgot, and some of which I dragged my feet on. So it was a little bit of both. But when it finally came down to the wire, and what I kept telling myself was, "Oh, I have time. I have time. I have time." And what I didn't realize then, which I know now, is that even though I thought I knew what the fixes were and how to fix them, that didn't work when I exported it and checked it and stuff. Something went wrong. And I wasn't anticipating for the hard drive to be not capable of handling that graphic export and this and that. I thought, oh, I've exported a sequence to disk before, a 20-minute TV show for work or whatever like that. Why is a 2-hour movie going to be any different? Well, it is. So that was a lesson that I had to learn then and there. But a lot of the time, though, I mean, I don't know about you. I can only speak for myself. Mentally, I'm doing a lot of the work. It's the sitting down and actually, getting it, the typing or whatever it may be, the clicking, the editing, however you want to describe it, done. That motivating factor at that last minute, it's like, oh, everyone's going to think I suck or I didn't do it or I'm horrible, blah, blah, blah. That motivates me. But until I'm 24 hours away from when it's need to be done, that motivation is not so much there. I don't know why. It's weird. It's I guess it's a prioritizing thing where it's like, well, I'll get to that. I got to clean the house. Like, this is more important because otherwise it's going to be dirty and distracting and I'm not going to get any work done. And that's just how it is. But I'm surprised that he can get work like that done. Do you know what I mean? Like, getting it done and getting it done well are two very different things.
It's insane to me. I look at, compare a Frank Frazetta painting to a modern movie poster, and it's night and day, right? Because if you could get even a single subject on a modern movie poster, that's apparently a day's work right there for people who are making these posters. I just look at them and I'm like, this looks like procrastination work. A lot of this looks like
movie posters today, you mean?
Yeah. This looks like you're just banging it out and going on pure graphic design, which is not. I mean, if you're good at graphic design, great. I just think that there's a big amount of. Once again, I'm just going to return to this Frank Frazetta paintings where it evokes a totally different fucking feeling, and it's an epic feeling versus. The poster for the new Batman movie is like so many other movies. It doesn't evoke it. I just don't get an idea of what I'm about to get into at all.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm pulling this up on my phone right now. But okay, if you look up on Instagram, AMP, American movie posters, well, technically it's alternate movie posters. I was just trying to do it like alpha, beta,
Yeah.
AMP. There is a whole community of artists who will design posters for movies that have already been out, long been out, that just have shitty posters that are floating heads. Now, some people do create more floating head stuff, but for some reason, it's much more dynamic and interesting to look at than the shit we get from the actual studios.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, it's mind-boggling because I love studying this stuff going, wow, look at how they compose the characters from that scene and this and that. Like, the studios have this type of shit. They have the capability to hire these artists, but they don't really invest in that anymore. And the sad truth of it is, movie posters are going away as a physical thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon Prime, all these movies are debuting out there now. You can release a one sheet digitally where you're like, oh, it's a new poster for Scream, but Scream's not going to be in theaters, so we're not going to put the poster in theaters, which means we're not going to print it, which means here it is. And that's it. And it's not very interesting most of the time. And that's the downside to this, is that we're losing a lot of great art from artists because you look at the works from Drew Struzan from some of the things, and man, those things make the movie better.
Yeah.
Like, you look at the poster for The Thing. He had no idea what the fucking movie was about when he did that. He literally banged it out in less than a day. I forget what the reason was. It was either they gave it to him like a last minute notice, or he fucked something up, or something happened, but he only had like 8 hours to do it. And he literally told a story once. I was watching a documentary where he was blowing on the painting as he was walking into the doors of the studio because it was that fresh.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Like, it's mind-boggling to me that there are so many great artists out there. If you look up the AMP Alternate Movie Posters account on Instagram, I think they have a Twitter, but they don't post nearly as much there. There's some great stuff that comes along, and I find all these great artists and I follow them, and they have all great works that are outside of just the alternate movie posters they create. And it makes me wonder if artists are being overlooked, and if there's a way to rescue covers. Do you know what I mean? Like, whether it be for movie posters or anything else.
I could go a lot deeper into that statement. Are artists being overlooked? Yeah.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is like, is there a way to re-empower them? You know what I mean? Because like, it was back in the day, it was like, oh, look at the Drew Struzan poster. That's going to be a good movie. But now it's just like, oh, there's the floating heads. Oh, it's Marvel. It's Iron Man. It's yada, yada, yada. But we don't have anybody taking chances on that kind of stuff. And how do you fix that problem though? You know what I mean? Because these great artists that are alternate movie poster creators, they're putting out stuff that without a doubt is phenomenal. And yeah, some of that stuff does get used. So they create covers, right, for a movie that came out in like 1993, say Hocus Pocus, for example.
Yeah.
When Hocus Pocus comes out for a Blu-ray release, they use the poster. But then when they come out with the 4K, they want something different because they don't want you to buy or to overlook it because it's got the same poster on the front. So they'll go to the alternate movie posters guys and say, whip up something alternate from Hocus Pocus. And that's the only place I see it. But then physical media is going away too. Like, they're not making discs for movies anymore. And so it's like, how do we save these artists? Because really the only thing that's going to end up happening is they're going to end up doing concept art for movies that gets lost and filed away in a warehouse and never seen by anybody unless it's the next fucking Star Wars. Like, I have concept art books in my theater that are for Avengers Endgame and Infinity War. But try finding that shit for something else that's come out in the last 10 years. You know what I mean? Like, all that great art is just gone, and it's at their disposal. They could literally repurpose concept art stuff into the movie posters with a couple of tweaks. And I don't know why they cling to the mountain of heads.
I will say what you're talking about right now is an existential concern that I've had in regards to the arts, like in general.
Yeah.
Because to me, it seems like the general trend has been strip down budgets as much as possible, strip down the number of artists used as much as possible, strip down the spectacle as much as possible. I don't know if it's gonna. It's hard for me to imagine it staying that way forever.
No, something will break through, and then they'll want to copy that. But
yeah, that's my assumption right now. It just seems like we're still going through this minimalist epoch where, because it's what's been working, that's what they keep repeating. And like we're both saying, it can only stay that way for so long, and then eventually people are going to want the reverse of that. Yeah, something fresh, something different. That's my.
But it's the weirdest thing is that this is your selling point. Like,
yeah,
I get an idea of running the same story into the ground, right? Like that's one way or the other, same characters we've seen a million times and reboots and remakes and this and that. But I feel like covers, movie posters, album covers, whatever it may be, fucking YouTube thumbnails, which, thank you for designing the one for us today. We did something different, right? We did something fresh and new other than my shitty Photoshops. And hopefully that'll get us a couple more clicks. But the idea, it's like really risk-free to try something on a cover. Really? I mean, yeah, you're selling the movie in an image, but you really don't have anything to lose, because if you're so confident of the fact that Leonardo DiCaprio's face is what sells the movie, why just show his face? Why not show him, you know, shooting a gun while riding a horse while, you know, someone is chasing him in a car or a train or something? You know, like, why not infuse action into the poster? Why not do that kind of thing?
Well, here's another thing too, though, that's changing, and this came to mind because I happen to have been in New York, in Manhattan, a week ago, or maybe a little less than a week ago. So much of advertising is moving towards, or at least there, so much of advertising was moving towards LCD displays. So when that's your situation, you're no longer just using still images. You're using
motion
cinema. Yeah.
No, there's motion posters, 100%. And that sucks for guys like you. Not that I'm saying you couldn't learn it, right?
Sure.
Or anything like that, but it's almost kind of weird fusion between my medium and yours, where you have to, you know what I mean? Like, I have to have motion going on, conflict, etc., that kind of things.
Yeah.
You have to imply motion, and to actually have it, it's weird for, you know what I mean, to think, like, you have to think in the next thing where it's like, oh, this is the next immediate beat.
Yeah.
Whereas you have a little bit of a jump because it's just, you know, establish what happens, establish what happens, establish what happens. I have to cover where it's going, like all the stuff in between. But I've never worked in a medium where it's like, well, you just have to wear it in this portrait frame.
Yeah.
And you can't change the atmosphere around it. You have to just work with this one image. And so it's like, it's that weird hodgepodge. It's like butting heads of two different art mediums. There's room for artists to step up and be like, all right, I'm going to be a motion artist and I'm going to design motion posters. But I can't hang a motion poster in my room.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that is a big part of it right now. I could. Oh, this is a rabbit hole that just keeps getting deeper.
Sorry.
The more I think about it, because if we go in the trajectory that I think things are going to go, I could imagine movie posters on the outsides of theaters literally just being like LCD displays with just the trailers for the movies, no still images, or very similar to you know, if you go on Netflix or whatever, you immediately get the trailer for the film. You don't get a poster or anything. You don't really get much of a thumbnail. There is a thumbnail, but it lasts like 1 second, and then you're immediately watching the trailer for whatever it is that you're hovering over.
Yep, it's barely 3 seconds before that trailer starts.
So I could imagine that poster art in the future goes in that direction, where maybe you get like an initial still image, and as soon as you walk in front of it or whatever, it starts playing maybe a scene or whatever from the movie.
Oh God, don't give them ideas.
You say I'm giving them ideas. They've already thought through this. I feel like this is already something that's been on the horizon for a while, and it becomes more and more prevalent as like LCD technology becomes easier and easier to manufacture. Okay. I would hate that, because I don't want to hang. I do not want screens in my house so much anymore. I work on a screen. I spend way too much time in my life on a screen. I want fucking art that I have to shine a light bulb at it in order to see it. That, to me, the only way you could get around that is if you could make some kind of technology that allows you to do basically, you know, a painting where you have to reflect light off of it, but it can act like an LCD screen. If somebody can do that, I will not complain anymore. I will shut up, because that's just what I'll use from the rest of my life for everything. I just don't want. I'm tired of having light projected at my face, quite frankly.
That's fair. And I think what you were saying about like being it like motion triggered and everything like that, where someone walks by and something starts playing, I feel like that won't last forever either, though, because at some point, all of our brains will become so accustomed to it that we'll just be like, oh, it's moving, but I'm not caring. Like, I'm not going to pay attention to it because I don't want to. But when that happens, the person, studio, company, film, comic, whatever it may be, the advertisement decides, no, we're just going to put up a picture that doesn't move and doesn't have like, fog slowly moving or any kind of motion, nothing, just a fucking picture and the title of the movie and the date. That's the one that people are going to stop and look at and go, oh, it's not moving. And you know what I mean? And like, that's how it's going to work. But to get to that point, we're going to have to go through the shit that is all the motion post. You know what I mean? Like it's just going to be complete bombardment, sensory overload, which is why, if I could find, I'm just thinking about this now, but if there's stocks in like campgrounds, I think I'm going to invest because the idea of getting out into the woods where there's no screens or something like that, I think in the coming years is going to start being one of the bigger things that people are going to seek out. You know what I mean? It used to just be like, oh, we wanted to disconnect from the TV. Well, now it's just, I want to get away from every screen possible. Yeah. Like, let's leave our phones at home and we'll have like a cellular emergency phone if somebody needs to get in touch with us or whatever. Yeah. But the rest of it's all at home. We're just going to eat in a little tent in a camper or whatever. And
like I was telling you, the idea that if somebody can get a hold of this idea, because for me, it would be life-changing. It would be having a laptop where the way that you look at the screen, it's not projected at your face. You have to like turn on a lamp, but it's still like the same sort of colorfulness and whatever. But it's not like, it would be like if you had a magazine you could interact with, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Now, are you talking about like regulated, where like the government was like, there can be no screens that are not like this anymore?
I wouldn't want it to be regulated. I'm just saying, as a product, I would buy it immediately. Okay. Because as a working artist, I don't.
So you could control your focus.
Yeah, exactly. I get it.
Okay.
You can control your focus, and also it fucking burns my eyes out to have like some light projected at my eyes 24/7 while I'm working. I say this as somebody who worked analog for years, and it's a difference. It's a huge difference in how I feel after I work on analog versus how I work digitally. And the big part of that difference is how much of an impact it has how much of an impact staring at a screen has on me psychologically, on me just in terms of how my physical body interacts with it. It's completely different. It's night and day. And I'm actually more productive working analog. I can work 10 hours analog. When there's a screen involved, I have to take breaks because I just there's a point where I'm like, I can't stare at this anymore. It's hurting I'm getting, migraines and shit. So
it's also better for less distractions too, because I keep trying to work on my script and I'm just like, well, I can check Facebook. Well, I could just see if anybody added me on Twitter, and someone's always added me on Twitter. And, oh, I got a new email. Oh, I wonder if there's a movie update. Oh, I want to see what people are saying about Texas Chainsaw tonight. Oh, I want to see da-da-da-da-da. And by the time it's all said and done, I've gotten like 3 sentences of work done, and that's it. Whereas if I decided, I'm going to leave my phone upstairs and there's no screens down here, and I just have a hard copy of my script in front of me, I can probably sit here and write notes with my ballpoint pen and knock this out in about 2 hours.
I want a piece of paper. It has a very low amount of storage on it. Like, let's say maybe a gig at most. And you can
upload. That's a lot these days.
That's a lot, actually. I can upload Clip Studio on it or Photoshop.
Okay. That'll take up a fair amount of space, so that'll work.
It's a reflective surface. I have to turn on a lamp to work on it. That's all I fucking want. Like, just give me that.
You're obsessed. It's great, though. I like that. You should try and work on that. See if you can find an engineer or somebody who can make that happen, and then you can be a silent partner and make billions of dollars off of it.
Anybody listening to this show, get in contact with me.
Matt J. Rainwater at Twitter and Instagram. All right, so we're off the topic, but that's okay. I think it's time we wrap up about covers or the first impression. I guess the summation that we're reaching here with this particular episode is, if you are in control of your cover, which is not always the case, whether it be a movie poster, album cover, comic book cover, YouTube thumbnail. Try something different. You know, try and be somewhat engaging. Take advantage of the medium. I think that's really the message that I would like to say with people, because like I looked at it when I designed the Haunted poster. I came at it from the Canon perspective, not willingly going, oh, that's what Canon did, I'm going to do it, but unknowingly, this is what I did. I was like, okay, I have this idea for a movie. I have not written the script yet. I don't have any actors attached. I don't have anything. I pulled a bunch of stock images, photoshopped it together, and I was just like, okay, I have a character on here, but I can't show him because I haven't designed that character yet. Boom, silhouette. Okay, he's creepy. That works. Where's this set again? Oh, the woods. Okay, I'll put it in the woods. Perfect. He's silhouetted in the woods. He's far away. What else do I need to say about this movie? Well, it's creepy. Okay, so I'll put a black vignette about it, or a vignette around it. What else? Oh, it's set at Halloween. Okay, I'm going to cloak the entire poster in orange. And I posted that on Facebook. God, it must have been 2015. And it blew up. Everybody was like, holy, I want to see this. And it was just me coming at it from a position of, okay, how do I encapsulate everything that I want from this movie onto a poster for a script I haven't written yet? It's creepy. It's set at Halloween. There's some mysterious character involved. Like, you know what I mean? Like I did that. I just took those ideas and I set them into a single image. I didn't have to, it was minimalist because I had minimal resources, not because I was trying to make it minimalist. To be honest with you, after the fact, I did play around with adding silhouettes of like other things in the poster with it. And when I posted that, no one gave a shit. It was really interesting to me. It was an experiment where I was just like, oh, it's not hitting as hard.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh, it's because it's making it distracting because they don't know what the focal point is. So as long as I have it centered on one creepy character in the middle of the forest, it works. But when I have too much shit going on, then people are like, oh, I'm not interested. This looks too big. You know what I'm saying? It's possible to go too big. People complain about that all the time about movies. It's like, why does it always have to be a world-ending threat? Why can't it just be, something small? And so, while we were complaining about minimalism earlier, sometimes it's what's necessary to what your story is.
For sure.
So I guess that worked out for me in the end. But I guess that's my advice to artists is that when you have to create the cover for whatever it is you're doing, really approach it from the idea of, how do I say this in a word? How do I say this in an image? How do I, you know what I mean? And that's what you should do. So if your advertisement has a whole bunch of heads on it, it's like, oh, check out these people That's not a selling point. I can go on Facebook and look at that now. That was a selling point back in the day when there was no Facebook or research. You know what I mean? Like, you couldn't just look up pictures of George Clooney whenever you wanted to. Like, that's why his face on a poster meant something. It was like, oh, George Clooney's in this. I didn't know because I don't have movie news or YouTube or whatever like that. I'm in the 90s. All I have is a newspaper article, and, they don't have a picture of George Clooney, or they don't want to waste the ink or whatever. And him on the poster, that was something special. Now, what does it fucking matter? I can go on my phone and I could find George Clooney 1,000+ photos in a half an instant. So I don't know. I guess that's me just being old and bitter, but find ways to say something different, or to say what you need to say, but say it differently than has ever before. Mr. Rainwater, you got anything to throw out there?
Yeah, I mean, just take a look outside of your comfort zones, and find art that you may have not seen before, people that we've mentioned, or just look, just go to a bookstore and check. I mean, not that many people go to bookstores as much anymore, but go check out some covers on books. I highly recommend looking at like sci-fi book covers, because they tend to be some of the more creative and inventive book covers out there. Check out Frank Frazetta. I highly recommend Frank Frazetta. Point being, just check out the buffet, the visual buffet that's available to you in the world.
That's true. It is a buffet.
And you can get some inspiration for, any artistic ideas that you may be trying to figure out how to properly evoke in the future.
Rip stuff off, steal stuff.
Yeah.
Just make sure it's for a good reason.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, everybody.